We'll do it live.
And we are live on Facebook once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance. We will be speaking of the ongoing protests at Columbia. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timmy, the hip hop MC in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Another day, another yen, I guess. Instead of another day, another dollar. Another day,
They
another
say that
yen.
in Japan? Is that a saying there?
No, no, they don't say that out here.
That wouldn't seem to fit with the culture, right?
Right. What people are stressing out here about is the currency exchange. It's just tanking. It's been tanking for like the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So yeah. The value, it's like half of what it was probably like 3 years ago. It's crazy.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
for people coming out here, it's great if you're coming to visit, if you're coming to travel, because then you get more bang for your buck. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, speaking on that, I actually have a couple of light topics, if you want to call them that, that just came to mind. One of them, since you're talking about traveling, I saw a video, believe it or not, it was an interview that was conducted with Dose Now. We talked about him on here before. He was a rapper, became a lawyer, and was convicted on marijuana charges, right?
Hmm.
I saw an interview with him prior to the charges where he was speaking on traveling overseas to perform music and how the audience overseas is often much more receptive to the art than in the US. He said that culturally, there's more of a focus on commerce in the US. And he said people in America will tell him they like certain artists or they listen to certain artists because they're successful. They do
Mm.
huge numbers, and that's why I'm a fan of them. And he said, if you go to Europe and you go other places overseas, that concept is foreign to them for the most part. You know, they don't care as much about the numbers you're doing. They kind of look at the art and take it and appreciate it on its own merits. And he said, as an underground hip hop artist, for example, you can go over there and generate a big fan base, a lot of appreciation for your shows if you're doing good music and they like what you're doing. Whereas in the US, of course, there are scenes that are into that kind of thing, but it's more so a culture of how big are your numbers, right? How many streams you got, how many views you got, how many units you moved. That seems to move people to support you more than overseas, where it's more about do we like your music, do we like your art?
I think there's definitely something to that because I mean we've known for a long time that a lot of artists go, especially um, underground artists or even some of the artists from the 90s that were big in the 90s go to Europe for tours
Right.
constantly because they're very well received over there. I think part of it has to do with, they're into that sound, that boom bap sound, that hip hop sound, that stereotypically hip hop sound. But also it probably also has to do with the fact that it's not you can't walk down the street and see like such and such artist here and there. Whereas like in New York,
Oh,
that big
many.
artist, you might see them all day, or that classic,
Right.
we used to go to what was that event by the Wonder Twins? They had the Connects List networking thing. Was online with Dana Dane and
Oh, sure.
Ice-T was in there. It's like
DJ Red Alert giving everyone dap as they leave.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, and that was just there, but you wouldn't
Right.
see that in
Well, that's a
Europe.
great point because I would even observe that phenomenon when I went out of state, right? You
Yeah,
go down the coast, even you travel down the I-95, you listen to the commercials that their local stations are putting on the air, their local summer jam concert or their equivalent of that. And they'll
right,
put on local artists sometimes. And they'll be like,
right,
maybe it's an opener or whatever, but performing live, hitting the stage, this local artist from Maryland or from Virginia, from North Carolina, that they're not national acts. They're just known locally in their area. New York doesn't do that because who are New York's local artists? Jay-Z, 50 Cent, like they don't really have the local, it's like, they're basically non existent to them, the true local artists, because their local artists are mega stars.
Well, I think there's even places like that have megastars as local artists,
Not
but
as much though. Not as much.
there's a big concentration in New York, not just megastars, but also you're talking about legacy icons, right? There's a lot of those in there. But even still, I mean, there's a lot of local artists in New York that just don't get the same type of shine like you might see in the South. They don't get that
But
same
that's
kind
my
of.
point, right? It's the actual local artists who aren't national acts in New York are almost non-existent to the New York scene because it's so saturated with big stars. And so the up and coming acts don't get the shine. And I've heard this a lot from New York artists who made it big. They said
Right,
that to get appreciated in New York, you actually had to get appreciated out of New York first, right?
right,
You need
right,
to be a big star in the South or on the West Coast or anywhere else, or maybe even overseas. You get
right,
that buzz, and then New York starts paying attention because in New York, I guess the level of competition is so high, and people are looking at the numbers,
right,
the financial markers more
right.
than other places, right? And I think culturally, to Dos Now's point, you see that more in the U.S. generally than other places. I do think that art can stand more on its own merit outside the U.S. because I think in the U.S. we are dominated by a culture that prioritizes commerce and finance. I think that is more pronounced here than other
I
places.
think yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it,
Yeah,
for sure. For sure. Um, yeah, that and it's sad because there are so many good artists that don't get the recognition. I mean, you know, being in the scene ourselves, we saw people that were just incredibly talented,
yeah,
putting out amazing projects,
oh
amazing
yeah.
stage shows, and just, don't get that same recognition. So
But
it's
here's the thing: you do have to get yourself in front of the right
sure,
people. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily an influencer, right? Or someone who's going to make you famous, put you on, but even a promoter, right? Like, for example, if you want to take your show on the road, you want to do shows, maybe you
right,
want to go overseas. Well, that doesn't happen automatically. You got to meet the promoters, you can meet the people who are doing this, right? Network. That's a big
sure,
part of it. So, a lot of people neglect that aspect of it. And this applies beyond just art and music, certainly. I think in life generally, right? There's a substance of what you're doing, but then there's the marketing, the networking, putting yourself in the right positions. And that's often overlooked, especially by creative types, artistic types, because we just want to create. We want to sit in a room
oh
and
yeah,
create. And you know
well,
what I mean? And
it's not a business.
we would all love to live off of our art, but if all we're doing is creating, we're never creating the opportunities for us to be commercially successful.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, I just want to make music, That's it's funny because, the an artist that we both know, a friend of ours, Face, he often says that and often said that, like, whenever we did something, like, man, I don't know any of that stuff. I just want to make music. I'm just like, yeah, okay. It's like I leave that to you. I just want to make music. So,
And that's fine, but then you shouldn't
yeah.
ask why your music isn't being heard or why you're not blowing up and this next person is if you're not putting in that work, right? It doesn't just magically happen.
Right. It's difficult. It takes a
Yeah.
lot of effort. It takes time and a bit a bit of luck as well. Like it's all of that.
Luck, I don't like the word luck, but yeah, I guess being fortunate in certain, but I think also you put yourself in a situation to be fortunate, right? So you have to, like, maybe everything that you do isn't going to bear fruit the way you want it
Right.
to, but you need to
Right.
keep putting yourself in those situations where maybe something will catch on, right? Maybe something will be quote unquote a lucky break, but it isn't just a random thing. It's you actually creating those opportunities and being present for them.
Yeah, yeah, it's not like yeah, exactly. So you still have to put in work. You still have to put in effort and time and like you said, be there.
Right.
You can't think that I mean, it might happen. It's a far remote chance, but you can't think that you're just going to just someone's going to stop by and see you on the walking by the street and say, "Hey, you, wow, you look amazing. You're dope." Like, okay, like
And
that
that's the
doesn't
thing,
happen.
right? People need to think of it more like a ladder than an elevator. Right?
Right. Yeah.
That applies universally in life also, right? People think that you're starting from nothing, and then all of a sudden someone finds you and plucks you out of obscurity, and now you're this megastar. You're on the top of the world, right? And that's not how the real world tends to work. You
Right.
slowly but surely increase your visibility, your brand value, your marketability, everything, right? You just keep at it, and it is like climbing a ladder step by step. And then the higher you get, the more visible you'll be, the more opportunities you have to do something even bigger and get yourself to the next step, right? So you're constantly building on that, right? If you're trying to
Right.
build up to, I don't know, this is like an arbitrary thing, 1 million streams, right? Don't expect to go from 0 to 1 million in one day. But if you can get from 0 to a couple hundred, that's great. Now, if you get from a couple hundred to 1,000, right, and you just keep building on that, and
Right.
that's how it is. It's a grind. That's why they call it a grind. You got to grind it out. And again, I think
Right.
that applies to everything in life. You try to start a law practice, right? Whatever it is, a business of any kind. This is what you deal with. Don't expect someone to just put you in that spot. You have to work for
Right. Yeah. We're not all Tyson Beckford.
it. And the other thing is, this was something he said was meant to be sold, not told. He said he was going to put us onto game in this interview that I stumbled across on YouTube. He said, if you're trying to go overseas and perform, it's best to actually book your ticket yourself as opposed to waiting for the promoter to get that together, to pay for your plane ticket and your lodging and everything. Just go
Yeah.
ahead. He said, that's an investment in yourself. You pay that money up front, and then you get out there and you figure out how many shows you need to do to make that money back. And
Right.
a lot of merch, right? Selling t-shirts, selling
Right.
whatever. But you have to figure that out. All right, each show I'm able to pull in this amount. So I bought the ticket already. I'm not waiting for someone to bring me out there. Again, you're making it happen yourself. But when you're out there, you figure, all right, maybe I got to do 10, 15 shows to make this money back, but I'm going to make the most of that time.
Right. Absolutely. And it also, for people trying to go overseas, doing it that way also helps to get booked because the promoter doesn't have to worry about you no showing.
Right.
You're like, look, I'm going to be here already during this time. So
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing. Not like I'm waiting for something to happen, whether or not I'm gonna make it or not or whatnot. So yeah. And I think a lot of people don't think about that, especially getting started. They don't think about that. They think, oh, well, I've got to get booked out there. You have to pay for everything and you bring out there. Like, no, a lot of artists will pay for themselves to get there and then do that type of
Right.
booking or whatnot.
Right.
And
And he said also, by the way, if the promoter is paying you a fee, which is a great thing, you build in your prorated plane ticket, let's say, into the
right,
fee.
yeah,
Prorated meaning, let's say you're doing 10 shows, well, then each promoter would, in theory, cover a tenth of that plane ticket, but you add that to your fee.
right, yeah. So yeah, don't go to the promoter and say, I want to do this show. It's going to cost this fee. It's going to cost my plane ticket, my hotel, and all this and that. You give them a set price, and then, like you said, you do the math for yourself on how much that's going to apply for your show, your hotel, and all that. Make it really simple for them. Like, okay, this is my fee, boom, and then that's how it is.
Yeah, yeah. And he said, you can go to a place like Finland, for example. Maybe you start out in Helsinki, right? But then
Right.
you network and you ask maybe you meet one promoter at first. You ask
Yeah.
him or her, hey, anywhere else in the country, any other city around here that there's shows going on, or places I can go, anyone you can introduce me to, and you network one person to the other. Before you know it, you can be doing shows throughout the whole country. And you make the most of your time.
Right.
So
Yeah.
interesting game, and I think very useful knowledge for anyone looking to grind it out. And again, this can apply in some ways to whatever you're doing in life, right?
Hmm.
So the other thing I wanted to mention was something that I came across. Um, it relates to Gmail addresses, right? I don't know if you've ever encountered this. I know I get this a lot. If you have dots in your email address, people will think that the dot is meaningful, but it's really cosmetic. And this can vary slightly, I believe, depending on the company that you're using. I know for Gmail, it's the case. I believe for most email companies, it's going to be the same type of deal. Where, like for example, I'm Mike G Scala, but my email is set up as Mike.G.Scala. Some people think that you have to put the dots in, and it's going to go to a different person or not go to me if they leave the dots out. Those dots are cosmetic, so I could be Mike.g, I could be M.I.K. Scala, you know what I mean? Like the dots don't make any difference. So you can put them in, you can take them out. They're not going to change anything. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of people don't understand that. That's, you know, it's one thing to keep in mind. But here's something, they call that the plus trick. It's related to that concept where if you have a Gmail account, you can use the plus sign after your username and put any string in there. And then you do the at gmail.com and it will still come to you. So I'm Mike G Scala at gmail.com. If I tell people email me at Mike G Scala plus friends at gmail.com, it'll come to me. Like anything after that plus, you can put in there and it'll still go to you. And what you could do then is you could, number one, organize your inbox accordingly. So let's say you wanted to have a separate email for friends and family, coworkers, whatever, maybe a certain business venture. You could then have filters in your email box to pull up those emails that go to that custom address that you created, even though they're all coming to you, it's all coming to the same email account. It's a way of separating them out, right? Then you can have a filter. We can click on a button and just pull up all the emails that go to my friends, all the emails, you know, from family, from this, from that. Here's another useful purpose of it. Let's say you want to figure out if anyone is using your data or how they're using your information. For example, let's say you sign up for you know, updates. Like, you know how sometimes you buy something online and it's like, you'll click here if you opt into our email updates. If you
Mhm.
provide an email address and you put plus, let's say the name of the company, then if you start getting emails later on from some random sources, you can see that that company gave your information to them because it'll come to that email. It'll still have that plus that you entered in there, right? Like, you know, Mike G Scala plus Home Depot at gmail.com. If I start getting these emails, Mike G Scala plus Home Depot from these random people, I'll know Home Depot sold or gave my information out to other people. So that's the
Home
thing.
Depot.
Uh,
Home Depot. You did this to
so
me.
I personally have not done this. I haven't used the plus trick, but it's something I read about recently, and now I am intrigued by it. I think that it can be useful for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So that sounds interesting. I've actually never used that feature either. I
Yeah,
have to you have to try that out.
I mean, it could be a way of not creating so many different email addresses for everything, right?
I have a spam email address.
Okay, yeah, that's a good trick too.
Just a single spam email address. Anytime I sign up for any sort of sign up to download something or test account, I just use that specific email address for it.
Right.
Seems like we might have Sheba in the house.
Sheba is trying to join us.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm
Oh,
here.
there she is.
I see you.
We could. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Abraham from the League of Women Voters is joining us. What's going on, Sheba?
Oh, a lot has been going on. We finally had our Jeopardy competition,
Okay.
and it went very well. And we had a winner. The winner was her reading skills weren't very good. She was like, I forgot what percentile she was in reading, but she ended up being the winner of the Jeopardy competition.
So how does that work? The winner didn't have good reading skills.
No, she didn't.
How
But
did she win?
she read the book she read. Uh,
Oh, looks like we're having a connection issue.
Yeah.
sorry, she read it was Accelerator Reader,
Mhm.
and they said at one time they thought that her reading scores were so low they didn't think she would really like make it do well on her test. But she ended up reading the entire book, and she ended up coming out on top.
All right, so explain this. You
But
said it's a Jeopardy competition. That means
Right.
all the students are what? Answering questions based on the same book, or how does that go?
Yes. What has happened that there was two classes, two fifth grade classes. Each class read the same book, and the top scorers for each week, we scored the children for each week on the questions that we gave. So the top scorers in each class ended up competing against one another.
Okay.
So yes, it was the same book. And I was quite surprised that two students completed the book. So once they got to the Jeopardy competition, we gave them some questions out of the book, and they were doing fantastic.
Nice.
Fantastic.
So the reading scores might not be where they need to be, but this is a step in the right
Their
direction
comprehension, the
because
Right.
they at
Yes.
least did very well with this one particular book.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It did it very, very well. Because when it's accelerator reader, it's a hard book. It's not an easy book to read. And it was a book they had never, we
What was the
selected a
book?
book, huh?
What was the book? Do you know?
Yeah, the book was Nick Blake and the Remarkables, Manifesto of Prophecy.
Okay.
And
Never
the
heard.
young lady that, I'm sorry.
I've never heard of that.
Well, the lady that wrote the lady that did a movie, I think she did The Hate You Give, Angie Thomas, she wrote the book.
Okay.
And uh, yeah, and the children just loved it. They fell in love with the book. Even the teachers fell in love with this book. They really liked it. And they were saying how it was really a hard read, but the children pulled it off.
Well, congratulations to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So will there be any more of this? Any more competitions? Wheel of Fortune now? What's going on? What's the next step?
Yeah, well, we thought about Wheel of Fortune, but yes, we're working on having it develop in the district, and we're going to go for there to see how, if we use sometimes Wheel of Fortune and if we use Jeopardy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe these
I'll
games
send you the pictures.
competitions bring out the best in these students.
Oh yes, it does. It really does. And
Absolutely.
it was nice because you had the three top students in each class. Although they were there as a team, they were competing individually.
Hmm.
But it was nice to see each class root their team on.
Right.
Like yeah, it was really fun.
Nice. Well, congratulations to the winner.
Yes, thank you.
So we have some interesting topics here. We do want to talk about Colombia. I think that's the big one this week.
Yeah.
A lot of people talking about it before we went live. I saw the mayor just did a press conference about it, telling the students to get out. Of course, they're occupying Hamilton Hall, which is a hall at Columbia that has a history of students using it for protest, right? Dating back to the Vietnam War in the 60s.
Um,
And it's getting serious, right? Students occupying this space, and you have Columbia now threatening to expel students who are doing this, who are not willing to leave, who continue to occupy the premises. So first of all, what do we think about that? I'm interested to get your take on this, Sheba. Do you think this is a peaceful form of protest that's consistent with these students' rights and they shouldn't be punished? Or is it appropriate for Columbia to punish them and even expel them potentially?
well, I've been watching it closely, and I think the students have a right to protest as long as it's peaceful.
Mm.
But what is happening is that there's a political issue, like in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was very political.
Sure.
Yeah, and I was young in that time, but I grew up in that time long enough to know how it affected the college campuses.
Right.
And this reminds me of the Vietnam War because if you remember Kent State when they were protesting,
Yep.
and they brought in the National Guard, and a young man was shot in the head and killed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me
So
let me ask you this though. You say that they have a right to peaceful protest, and I agree.
Right.
We all have a right to peaceful protest, but is it peaceful if they are forcibly occupying property that doesn't belong to them?
But that's what the protests are about, right?
But is that peaceful? I mean, every protest isn't necessarily peaceful.
Well,
Is that peaceful?
but are they damaging the property? What are they doing to the property?
Well, they could be, but even if they're not, let's assume that they aren't. Let's just assume that they don't have a right to be there. overnight, for days and potentially weeks, months, whatever at a time, that it's essentially a trespass, right? It'll be kind of like be going into someone's house. Not quite the same because there are
Trespass is
students there for
violent,
the most
though.
part, but
Yeah, I think it's peaceful. It still counts as peaceful. I don't think a
Yeah,
trespass is violent. Um,
so okay, what if it was a business, locking yourself in someone else's business against the owner's wishes?
it's
That's
not
still peaceful to
violent.
you?
Yeah,
but
it's
you,
peaceful.
but
It's not
isn't that
violent.
Isn't so?
no?
Isn't there a threat
Isn't
of
that
violence at
public?
least though? Isn't the implication, we're here whether you like it or not, and so it's a
No,
forcible takeover of your property?
I don't think that's a
But is
violent threat.
right?
Go ahead, Chiba.
No, I was going to say, but isn't that to some extent public property? Because students are on that property all the time. And where's the line drawn that you cannot? Is there
Just
anywhere
well,
on that
We're losing.
campus saying that you can't protest?
well, just because students are on the property all the time doesn't make it public property. I mean, we know this. First of all, it's not a public university, right? But even if it was, like for
No, it
example,
isn't. That's true.
even Lehman College, right, which we know is part of the CUNY system, it isn't easy for me to get up in there, right? Remember we tried doing the show up in there? Security stopped me. They wouldn't just let me walk up on campus. And so eventually they did because they realized I was supposed to be there for the show. But I had to go through security and show my ID and make sure I was on the list and all this kind of stuff. So it isn't like anyone is able to just walk up in there. Now you're talking about a hall, a dorm, residence hall that isn't open to the public for anyone to just occupy, right?
Right,
Still part of
but
Columbia's property.
they're trying to draw attention to an issue
I understand
that
that.
they feel, so they have to protest in a way that will help them promote what they are standing for.
Sure.
So I can see them that's something that they would do.
Something they would do, but I think the question is still warranted. Is it within their rights to protest, right? Because
I
they
think
could
so.
protest, for example,
Yeah.
they could protest on a public street or even maybe on a public area, a common area on campus, which is still not completely public, but
But
at least
is it
not
going to be
inside of the building.
effective?
So this is, another step.
Is it going to be
I think it's
effective?
a worthwhile
Is it going
question
to
to
bring
ask,
attention?
if that's within their rights as students. I mean, put it another way, is Columbia within its rights to punish these students if they're breaking the school's rules and policies?
Sure.
But is it going to be effective? They're trying to make it effective. So that, and I understand that part of it, what they're trying to do, they're trying to bring that attention to us, an issue that they feel is relevant. But how you go about the protesting, are you going to make the campus aware of what you're doing? See, all of a sudden now they got the attention that they were looking for. Because
Well, we got a couple different questions here. Whether or not it's effective is a different question to whether or not it's peaceful and whether or not they're in violation. I think those
whether
are
it's lawful, right?
right.
And whether the school is within its rights to punish them.
But
There are a lot of questions here. And also, what are they expecting the school to do? Obviously, there are some demands that are coming out of this about, the school should not be supporting the Israeli government and all that kind of stuff. But I think this is a larger protest really about the war, not so much about the school itself, right?
Right.
And so they are holding, for lack of a better term, the school hostage over an issue that's really beyond what the school could do. But I guess that's similar to the Vietnam situation, right? Where the school wasn't going to stop the Vietnam War, but they wanted to protest with the school or at the school.
But I think they said they wanted this university. Does the university invest in? They want to divest
that was
out of
part of
Israel?
it, but then some of the students didn't even know because they were saying, well, part of why we're protesting is we want to see where all the money is going and if it's going places where we don't want it to go and that kind of stuff. So it's one of those things where you have so many people now involved that there's so many different messages and it gets kind of clouded and confused and not everyone knows what they're talking about. And you know what I mean? It becomes very performative for some people. Some people may be a lot more genuine, but it's the bigger it gets, the harder it is to really contain.
Right.
Well, what is Columbia's rules on protesting on campus?
Well, it's not about protesting on campus. It's about taking over the dorm room.
What's their rules?
That they can't
What
do
are
that.
their rules?
that's not allowed. So they're
Yeah,
threatening to expel them for doing so. I saw some people saying that they should be expelled, not rather deported, if they're here on student visas. So they're not American citizens. They're here just on student visas, and they are part of this occupation. That the U.S. should actually take the step of deporting them, citing concerns about potential terrorism, 9/11, and so forth.
I think that's too far. Um, uh, I think one of the rights that we hold dear in this country is the right to protest, is the right to stand up and voice our disagreement with authority. And unfortunately, we're seeing that being restricted more and more. I think was it Texas or something like that passed laws, or Florida, where you can't protest on certain things, or even certain things in the government. You can't say certain things about Israel or whatever. I think
Right.
that is the wrong path to go down. This is one of our fundamental rights. And one of the things that we've always poked our chest out about to say that we have over other countries is that we can openly disagree with our leadership. And, that's the core of it.
Right.
So I
And that's
think,
actually a good point, Jay, because I've seen that critique. Some of these students are siding with governments, it seems, or countries where if they tried making that same kind of protest, or a protest against governmental action in those countries, they
right,
wouldn't be able to. Right, so they're not taking. Maybe they're taking for granted, or they're not appreciating the values that we hold ourselves out to have in this country that
Mhm.
can do it here.
right. And I think so. I think a lot of it can be true at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think it's, even though they've overtaken this building, I don't think it's violent. It's peaceful still. I think at the same time, the university has the right to be able to hold them responsible for, what
Uh-huh.
they've had done. I think going so far as to say terrorists is way too far, and it's a
Yeah.
Well,
poor use of the term. I don't think
to be
just because
fair,
they've overtaken it is an indication of violence
right,
or
right. To be fair, I don't think most people certainly are labeling all of the student protesters as terrorists, but they're saying that people who came on student visas, if they're spewing this anti-Semitic language, and some have even said, I don't know about the ones on student visas, but you did see on the news some at least one person was talking about you lucky I don't go around shooting Zionists or whatever he said. If people are talking like that and they're here on a visa, some people think that maybe they should be sent back because they could end up becoming troublesome, similar to the 9/11 hijackers who were here in the U.S. as well.
I think that should be on a case by case basis, an individual basis on what their actions are, what they've done in that regard. And I think what we're seeing, the issue is more about um it's being confused, I think. All of these protests, right? Even if we got a lot going on here. There's this 1,000-year-old conflict or whatever between cultures. We've got these issues of political nature. We've got disagreeing with a foreign government, but people taking it um, as being anti-Semitic just because you disagree with the Israeli government. We've got, there's a lot that goes on in this.
Yeah.
And oh, looks like we got Andre coming in. And but I think all of it can be, this is part of what we do. We protest, and we should be allowed to protest, and we should be allowed to voice our disagreements and our
I
opinions.
agree.
Sometimes it's not going to be as pretty as we may like because
Right.
people don't listen. Um, because they have their own biases. They want to uphold certain structures. And so sometimes this happens, but there can be some consequence to that. But
Mm-hmm.
we do need to understand that since this is part of who we are,
Yeah.
we don't go too far
So
with that.
I'm going to bring in Andre in a second to give his take, but it seems like, Jay, to summarize, you're saying that the protests, to the extent that they're peaceful, should
Right.
be allowed as peaceful protests. We shouldn't perhaps have a law enforcement response, but at the same time, to take the nuanced view, Colombia is within its rights to punish these students to the extent they're breaking their policy. Is that what
Right. And I think there should be some leniency here. I mean, we want our universities
Mhm.
to be this bastion of thought, of
right?
nuanced thought, opinions, and thought.
Right.
That that's kind of one of our strengths. We've always held that in high regard, that this is where these things come from. Um, but there will be, I'm sure there will be some sort of a limit at some point.
Mhm.
But I don't think there needs to be, we don't need to be calling in military or National Guard or
Well, that's the
Right.
police.
thing. Mayor Adams just again, before we went live, did a press conference saying, get out or there could be a police response.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's a bit because, like I said, seeing what has happened in the past, I think it could be. It's a bit much. I think.
All right, well, let's
You
bring in
know,
Andre. We have a political consultant, Andre Bystroff, who has joined us numerous times in the past. Try to keep it clean this time, Andre, if you can. But what are your thoughts on what's going on at Columbia? Is it considered a peaceful protest to take over Hamilton Hall the way the students have? Are they within their rights to do it? Is a law enforcement response appropriate? And is Columbia within its rights to threaten to expel these students?
That's quite a number of questions. How's everybody doing tonight?
we're doing all right.
Hi Sheba. Hi
Hi.
Jay. Mike, good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So you guys are not talking about the Kendrick Lamar response. I got it. So my my perspective on the Columbia protest. Look, there is a long history of protest at Columbia as well as through colleges in the United States. I would like to point out slight differences outside, obviously, of the topic of the protest and things of that sort. I'll say this. I thought it was interesting, and I think, Mike, you and I talked about this earlier, that the last time that Hamilton Hall was occupied, you got to see photos of everybody involved because there was an actual dialogue that was happening in relation to what the protesters wanted versus what the administration, et cetera, wanted and things of that sort. I don't know. I guess, to the degree that it's modern day and everybody can get doxxed and everything else, I understand the potential need for anonymity, but it's peculiar that it seems to me that a lot of the folks who are inside, I don't know if it's acknowledged or known if they're exactly students, if they're not students, who they exactly are. I mean, look, I
That was
don't
brought up also, by the way. I think that's a worthwhile point that we have assumed that these are all students, but there is a concern that they're not. There are people coming from the outside. Even Mayor Adams in his press conference brought that point up. He said there are known agitators who just want to cause chaos. They're not Columbia students. They're getting themselves involved in this. And so I
So,
think
I
that's
mean,
a very
look,
different situation because they're clearly trespassers at that point. They don't belong there in any way, right?
well, look, I mean, look, there's the law and there's also, things in terms of, justice and being able to protest and voice your opinions and stuff. I went to every protest against the Iraq War when I was a student, when I was younger. That was my time of protest. I don't remember it changing anything that the administration did, but it was nice to be there with like-minded people and protesting an injustice of.
But were those organized protests done lawfully and in accordance with the policies of the school, or was it a
No,
hostile?
but I'm talking about, we had protests not just in terms of the schools, we had protests going into parks. We, you know what I mean? There was confrontations with police. We protested the Republican National Convention 2004. I don't know if you remember that. A number of protesters, some folks that I knew and stuff ended up getting arrested that day. But the thing is, there was a certain knowledge that there was the potentiality that your public disobedience could warrant arrest. And that's, kind of part of public disobedience, that you're willing to be arrested for it, for something that you believe in.
Right.
I don't necessarily know that maybe this generation of kids who, are spending a much different price for their education and are coming from a completely different background socioeconomically, than the students during the protests in 1968 did in terms of Columbia. I mean, I don't know if that's another factor in it. It's also why maybe some of them, keep their faces covered, because they don't want to piss off wealthy parents. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a concern of being doxxed on Twitter, right, by other people,
Well,
maybe not just by Columbia pointing them out, expelling them, suspending them. Maybe they don't want their life ruined by people trying to dig into their past or make things up
but
about
I mean, but by
put
the
their
way,
address online or whatever.
I
Absolutely.
mean, I get that as well. I mean, you never want any kind of violent, blowback for, you protesting or anything like that. That sounds absolutely awful. But I don't look, I don't know. It's weird now. It's weird. At the same time, internally, I do lean towards, of course, letting people protest. And these are kids, and people do need to remember that ostensibly these are children, and we don't need, kids getting violently arrested on, college campuses. It's not a thing. But I will also want to point something else out.
Yeah.
I do also want to point something else out. And just in terms of it's an election year, imagine if this occurred during a Trump presidency. Just imagine the kind of federal response to college protests if this occurred during a Trump White House. The National Guard not only would have been sent in at this point, but they would have had strict instructions from the DOJ saying, hey, listen, we'll cover you for any type of Kent State type of issues. And for any kids that don't know what happened at Kent State, I recommend you look it up.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. You saw what happened with the protesters, or what was it? Was it Black Lives Matter at the time? I forget what it was, but remember the tear gas that was used?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. The response would be much more heavy-handed, but there is disruption at Columbia, right? Because now they're saying that everything's going to be remote for the rest of the semester. So no more in-person classes there.
They also canceled. They also canceled the graduation, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. So there is an actual.
Well, I mean, not that like they didn't cancel graduation, but the ceremony.
Right, the ceremony.
Graduation ceremony.
Right.
Right, right. And so things are happening there. And of course, you have students who have nothing to do with this protest, who just want to get their education. So your point, probably paid a lot of money for it, and now they can't to the extent that they were hoping, right? So that's part of what's going on there, that there is disruption, right? It isn't, maybe it's not violent, right? But it isn't entirely without disruption or without consequence to the students and to the school itself. So there's that. It also sounded like you were saying that maybe there's a hint of privilege in.
No, I mean, I do.
I mean, the
I mean,
fact
look,
that they're.
I don't want to speak necessarily to anybody's lived experience who's
Yeah.
out on that campus or anything else, but it does seem to me a bit privileged to say that, hey, we're going to go out here and protest, but we want to face no consequences from
Right.
school or from, police or anything else like that. You know what I mean? We don't want any repercussions whatsoever, but you have to listen to our demands. It seems, I mean, look, I guess when you're young and stuff, it's the time to be idealistic and naive, I guess. But at the same time, like, it does seem kind of wild to me to not think that you might get arrested for something that you believe in if you're out there, potentially breaking.
Honestly, we tend to think of law enforcement as a greater or more dramatic response, but I wouldn't be surprised if people would prefer getting arrested than being expelled from Columbia.
I mean, monetarily for sure. If you're gonna get a misdemeanor, you know what I mean, like a desk appearance ticket and stuff, like $120,000, $120 and stuff versus $100,000 that you're paying in tuition and stuff. And
Right.
if potentially you're forfeiting an entire semester's worth of fees and things like that.
Yeah, and maybe even the inability to enroll in another school, right? I mean, maybe it might be a stain on your record where people don't even want you to go other places.
I mean, yeah, you never know, man. Mike Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene might follow you to every college you go to from now on.
Or certainly a less prestigious school you might have to end up graduating. Right? You pay for this prestigious Ivy League education, and you might end up somewhere else because you got expelled. So
no, I mean, look, this could have potential long-ranging consequences for anybody. And also, by the way, I'd like to point out on both sides, you know what I mean, whether you're a protester or a counter protester, and you know what I mean, and it's you know what I mean, it does seem like there is a lot of heated dialogue that's happening on college campuses right now, and I think that in a time that everything is being recorded, it might potentially be disastrous down the line.
Right. And again, that may be why people are sometimes using those masks or scarves to hide their face. But that goes back to this idea of, is it a privileged protest? Are they trying to have it both ways, where we're going to protest, we're going to say, you know, we're taking a stand, but not really, because we don't want
Yeah, I mean, look,
you don't want you to know who we are. Also, by the way, the fact that they waited till spring, right, to set these tents up. I mean, they weren't doing that throughout the whole winter. You know, and it's obviously is not a new issue. This has been going on since October 7th, and really prior to that in many ways. But now you're seeing the weather get nicer, and so all of a sudden it's protest time.
I mean, you know, I didn't quite think about it like that, but you know, that's a fair point. It is quite nice outside. I took my dog out a couple of times. It was good.
Did you protest anything when you were out there?
What's that?
Did you protest anything when you were out there?
Mostly like a lot of landscaper noise. They're not, you know, they're not doing a good job not freaking out my dog when they're
Okay. Yeah.
doing their business.
At least you doing your part. Yeah.
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 I mean, I don't, you know, I don't go far. The world is a scary place these days.
I think
So go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say we should probably bring in at least what they're looking for. The protesters' aims are to get. They've got, what is it, three demands that I saw from article. They want them to divest from companies that support Israel's government. They want transparency in university finances, and they want amnesty for students and faculty disciplined for their part in the protests. So that last part is kind of
privilege
weird.
prong, right? We want to protest but not be held accountable for it.
Right, but I mean, isn't there also certain difficulties in like the specific kind of divestment they want because they have a satellite campus in Tel Aviv or something like that? Or is that NYU that has a satellite campus?
Well, I think before you came on, we were saying some of the students didn't even really know where the money was being spent, and they were saying, well, that's what we would like to see. We want to see the finances and be able to track.
That's a transparency in that regard.
But it's also like which kids like to see the finances? Like who is this? Who are these people who want to see like the books of Columbia? Or is this like just open source it and just like let the books be publicly available? I don't know. Look, I don't also
or the students, right? They say the students should have a right to review it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if that's a solution. I don't know if that's a viable thing. Does this infringe in like, you know, in terms of you know, the type of investments that the school does? I did find it a bit insane that I found out that like is like they have a fund and stuff of, you know, tens of billions of dollars and stuff. They have an endowment of, you know, like we're talking about a lot of money. I mean, you know, figures that I kind of just
talking about one of the most prestigious institutions in the whole country and world, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like 20 billion and stuff seems like, you know, kind of a large amount to have in your coffers and stuff, and maybe, you know, pay the faculty a little more and stuff, maybe figure out some other shit and stuff, you know what I mean?
Here's something that was proposed. I think I had mentioned this to you offline. There is a bill in Congress now. Richie Torres is a sponsor. It's a bipartisan bill, right? There's a Republican as well. I don't know if it's Lawler or who the Republican is, but they want to have anti-Semitism monitored on any campuses, any colleges, any institutions that receive federal funding. I'm sure there will be efforts to mirror that state level, maybe the city level and whatnot, but they're saying if you're receiving money from the government, you should be held accountable and you should have to report on instances of anti-Semitism on campus.
I mean, okay. What's going to be the body that reports it?
Monitor. That's the whole thing. They're saying that if they want the money, they have to appoint a monitor to do that and issue.
I think the question is who's going to decide what's anti-Semitism?
Well, but not just yeah, but I'm talking about like what is that body, right? Like, you know, like so are you creating a new body or is it something that already exists in the school? Because I do think that there are way too many administrators versus like actual teachers in a lot of our universities and other places.
Well, if they've got $20 billion, they can afford it.
Well,
but I'm just no, but it just, you know, it just seems a little silly to me. You know?
I'm sure they can make that part of someone's job who already works there, but basically they're going to have to, according, and it's in the past yet, this is just something that was pitched, that was introduced, but they would have to report on anti-Semitism. My question is why?
Wait, is specifically anti-Semitism, not about any other type of discrimination, racism?
Not according to this bill. Specifically, yes, if they're receiving federal money, they have to report specifically on anti-Semitism. So my question is, why stop there? Why
Right.
not report Islamophobia and other types of
Right. Right. I
Yeah.
agree. That would be one of my, questions as well. Like, why would you only single out this one
Uh-huh.
here? About
I believe
Because it's a popular bill for the
Yeah.
constituencies of those respective Congress people. This is a temporary issue. You know what I mean? Like give it a couple of months. This is not going to be a hot button thing at
when the
all.
weather gets colder, right? I mean, that might be the thing.
So I was watching this. They talked about, you know what I mean, primary issues, like what's important to voters. For young voters, 18 to 29, Israel Palestine ranked as 15th for
Mhm.
Democratic voters.
Right.
Yep. Just saying. You know what I mean? Like I think that this is something that is entirely bolstered and propagated by the media. The fact that I am receiving 20 different, you know what I mean, like alerts on my phone about, protests on college campuses, updates from every resource possible.
Mhm.
Every elected official, after reading that in the media, has to have a comment. Then the media comments on their comments, and it's just this kind of spiral, and it's continuous, and it's ridiculous. I do not think that this is something that it's going to be in any way majorly affecting either, policy from Israel. I don't think it's going to widely affect policy by the United States. I think that I admire young people when they, are willing to face a camera and say, I stand for
Mhm.
this. I don't care if I get arrested.
Even with the mask on?
No. I said if you're willing to face
Right.
a camera, face what have you, because it's a difficult world out there. If you have a mask on, I may respect your message depending on what the message is. As I've said before here on this podcast, I'm just genuinely against children dying. It's a crazy, crazy position to take. I just don't like children dying, whether they be
Mhm.
Jewish children or Muslim children or Christian children. You know,
Right. Okay.
and don't forget those secular children too, you know, all
Right.
of that good stuff.
Well,
The-
that's kind of what, you mentioned the tuition, or they're paying $100,000. Let's round,
Yeah.
say, in general, they're paying $100,000, and if the government, not the government, if the school is investing or supporting institutions that is supporting the Israeli government, then they are contributing their tuition dollars to children dying, and that's what students are having part of an issue with. So they're asking Colombia to divest from things that are related to Israel's government in that regard. So that's, is that not a valid ask? I don't want my tuition dollars to be used in a genocide.
yeah, but I mean, again, the word genocide is a difficult word to parse. You know what I mean?
30,000 people are
Mhm.
dead. It's not a
Yeah,
difficult word to parse. It's
hold on,
people.
hold on. First of
Yeah.
all, the word genocide is a 20th century word. It was literally coined in 1948 to describe what happened during the Holocaust. Okay, when there was a specific motivation by an individual to kill a race, an ethnicity, a religious group of people, several in fact, including the Romani and Black folks. They believed in a specific kind of master race. It is debatable whether sending dumb bombs, as Netanyahu government is currently doing, and indiscriminately killing children versus specifically targeting children, whether that constitutes as a genocide, legally speaking. So
Right.
again,
And also,
I
legally
personally am
speaking,
uncomfortable
the word,
using the term genocide. I'm
word
also
genocide isn't only tied to children either. You're talking about trying to deliberately wipe out an entire population.
Here's my honest belief. I think it is in Netanyahu's it is in his best interest to prolong this war, to make it larger, to include Iran in it if entirely possible. I think that Netanyahu is, if not as much directly responsible, he is just as much indirectly responsible for the massacre and atrocities on October 7th. Netanyahu government funded and helped fund Hamas.
Mhm.
Let's be very clear. These are two forces that are against a two-state solution. They are oppressive, horrible regimes. Hamas for the folks in Gaza, Netanyahu for the folks in Israel. There will never be peace or a solution in that region with these two powers in play. Period. And so we should be concerned about all children in that region dying, as we should be concerned about children dying in Ukraine, as children dying in every region of the world where there's current conflict and injustice. Our hyper focus on this region without actually trying to appeal to any kind of diplomatic solutions or figure out a way where funding can be leveraged to change the current government setup in both places. This all seems to be like just bearing down to rhetoric. One is either you're just pro-Israel or you're just pro-Palestine, and without any sort of nuance or any sort of policy position in between.
Right.
And
that's why it's also hard to
whatsoever.
It's hard to draw a one-to-one comparison between this and the Vietnam War and the protests from Vietnam, because the U.S. was directly implicated in that. You were talking about the draft, right? Our people being sent to die in the war. This is something happening overseas where it's, you're pro this side, you're pro that side, but it doesn't really hit home the same way. Unless you're from those areas, right? We have family there. I mean, there are people who are implicated, but largely, right, most of the student population isn't as directly impacted as, let's say, in the 60s during Vietnam.
Well, unless you have family there,
your audio is terrible.
Yeah, we have
to be concerned because I watched the city council meetings here in Poughkeepsie, and every week, that's what people would come and talk about: Hamas and Israel. What is happening? My family's there. Some of my family members have been murdered out. Some of my family members are in jail. Some of my family, and it's both sides. It's either Hamas or it's either for Israel.
Sure.
So, it's when you talk about the protests, but you just look at how the protests are and is shaping up. There's no two ways about it. And it got to the point the city council had to tell them in Poughkeepsie, we have to focus on what's happening here. Not that we're not concerned or we're not, and we don't hear what you're saying. But if we focus all of our energy there, what's going to happen to the needs of the people here?
Yeah.
You see? So
I think maybe what the mayor was talking about when he said that there are certain people with an interest in sowing chaos, right? They're trying to distract us from the issues at home with these things, right? They want us all up in arms. They want us fighting. They want us yelling at each other because then we're not solving problems that affect us here.
And as a matter of fact, they have an encampment on Vassar College campus now.
Yeah. But again, so I think if we take it back to the original thing about the protests, I mean, that's to be expected, right? I mean, it's we have that history in our country for especially college students to protest wars, issues, this, that, and take place on college campuses. I don't think we have a problem with that, for people to protest and have some focus on that.
Although this is, to my recollection, the first time that it's happening without a direct link to U.S. policy. I mean, maybe they're just saying, "Oh, divest" and things like that. Well, I guess if you want to find a parallel, apartheid, South Africa, right? They did protest for that too. But most of the time, it's about the U.S.'s involvement in a war or U.S. policy, racism in the U.S., right? Things like that. This is really almost solely focused on what's going on outside of our country.
I think, I mean, we have said, or our leadership has said multiple times, we have unwavering support for Israel, right? We've sent money.
I mean, we've slightly adjusted this, and
recently.
And by the way, look, I actually kind of blame the situation and like our problems in relation to our foreign policy, both in relation to Ukraine and us not being forceful enough and getting enough spending in there as quickly as we needed, as well as, you know, us not being enforceful enough with Netanyahu. I kind of lay all this on, you know, Anthony Blinken's head. I do not think that, you know, to use the parlance of Coppola and stuff, he's not a wartime consigliere. He's not. He just, you know, he would be good during peacetime, but he just during wartime, the man is a little weak, and you kind of have to be forceful with, you know, certain parts of the world if you kind of, you know, want certain results. You know what I mean? Like, don't forget, Netanyahu was the guy that went to the UN during Obama's presidency just to shit on Obama during a speech. Pardon my language. I apologize. But again, that was literally, it never happened before. He came there just because Obama during that time was slightly critical of the actions of illegal settlements in the West Bank. And so Netanyahu came and made a big speech on the floor of the UN, carried by Fox News over and over and over again. Never happened before in the history of Israeli-U.S. relations. And that's because over time, Israel, quite frankly, knew that it could affect U.S. policy. They knew that, you know, a lot of times people would take even a minor criticism of Israeli governance as a thing to call you an anti-Semite in terms of your political opposition. And it went back and forth. And that's very unfortunate because there are very real, vital criticisms, particularly of the current trend of the Israeli government going further right, going further into, you know, religious zealotry, going into further into religious fervor. Just by the way, just like our own opposition party here in the U.S., you know, any trends towards Christian nationalism within the Republican right, not only is it disastrous for the country, it's disastrous for their own party in the long term.
And that's,
we're clear.
I think, an important point to make, that criticizing the Israeli government doesn't make you an anti-Semite.
I mean, it shouldn't. I mean, I think it's absolutely absurd. Like, look, you should support, you know, Jewish people. You should, you know, I don't know. Look, there are various folks that they can make a case against the lack of necessity of a specific Jewish state. I'm not one of those people, frankly. I have no qualms with Israel. I have no issue in terms of there being a two-state solution, peaceful homeland for both Israeli folks, Jewish folks, to be able to return to a homeland that was their own, you know, millennia in the past, as well as a state for some of the more recent generations of folks who lived on that land that are Palestinian. There could be a peaceful way for these people to exist. And a lot of the time, people do exist peacefully in Israel, despite what our media kind of portrays things to be as well. Having said that, you know what I mean, in terms of the living conditions within the current framework, the current territory of Palestine, it is, you know, horrific in terms of underfunding, in terms of, you know, police state, in terms of, you know. But anyways.
So, Jay, I know we had a poll question last week. We didn't get it up, and now I wanted to ask a follow-up on that, right? So I think this coming week, we're going to put out 2 questions related to this topic, right? The first one we put out last week. Can you remind me what that was again?
It's actually slipped my mind as well. What that one was.
I think it was about, is there a concern that the message can be lost?
Right, something like that.
In the protest?
It's something like that. But yeah.
As temperatures rise on this. All right, well, we're going to get that question out again. But now the question I want to ask is, do you agree that protesters at Columbia University should be subject to expulsion by the school administration?
Wait, the protesters or the folks that took over the Hamilton building?
They are one and the same, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, they're not, right? Like, so I mean, I don't think that folks in the encampment necessarily, you know, deserve to be expelled, right? But what about folks in
maybe protesters that have taken over?
The ones who have taken over are the ones that we're speaking of.
Okay, gotcha.
So do you want to make that more clear, the ones who have taken over Hamilton Hall? We could do that. It's very specific, but it's fine.
Or, I mean, I think we want to know in general.
Well, the results may vary, right? To Andre's point, people might not think anyone protesting should be expelled.
Right.
but the ones occupying the dorm.
Yeah.
We can phrase it like that for the sake of being specific. All right, let's do it like this. The poll question of the week is: do you agree that the people occupying? See, now I'm being like very lawyerly. Let me say the students occupying. I'm thinking about Adam saying that they weren't all students, but then they wouldn't be expelled if they weren't students. So let's stick with the
Right.
students occupying the whole. All right, take three. Poll question of the week is: do you agree that the students occupying Hamilton Hall at Columbia University should be expelled?
All right. We'll work with that there.
Mhm.
By the way, what happens to the non-students?
Well, they can be arrested.
For what charge?
Trespass, for one.
That's
Yeah,
it? You think?
It depends on what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just sitting there and not saying, not.
So if I'm an alumni, I can be arrested?
Well, you
If
can
I
always
am
be
an
arrested.
alumni of Columbia?
You can
Huh?
always be arrested for trespass in theory. I mean, you can't just walk up into a dorm on a private university campus.
I mean, you can, and if they'd say you got to leave, then, you know, and you don't leave, now you're trespassing. So, yeah.
By the way, I actually have an amusing lawyer question for you. So I saw some of the footage of Hamilton Hall being, during the occupation and stuff, and there were, flying flags outside of the window on the top floors and stuff, and they were kind of hanging out. If one of the kids falls, right, and it's technically still Columbia property and it's a student, does the student's parents have cause to be able to sue the university for not providing enough safety for their student, and therefore, they're damaged? So like for medical bills, for
That's
example.
very fact dependent. It will be a matter of negligence, though. Is the school acting negligently? Are they doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or are they failing to do something?
I mean, would it be
Adequate
considered
safety.
negligence to let kids take over a dormitory?
But that's what I'm saying, right? So you would have to point to something very specific that Columbia failed to do that is the norm to do, right? Other precautions. Every school takes these precautions, but Columbia didn't take them, right? But if it's an extraordinary situation of students overtaking a building and there was nothing really to be expected from that, then there's no negligence. But maybe if you want to get very creative, you can say, well, Hamilton Hall has a history of these protests, and by now Columbia should have taken steps to fortify it better or whatever. But it really depends on exactly what happened, and that would probably be stretched even then.
I'm just curious. I'm just saying, one of these kids falls out of a window.
Their mom could have called them and say, hey, look, leave. Mother didn't take any precautions. She didn't do anything. So she can't sue anybody.
Look, I'm just saying, I hope the kids are having a good time themselves. All I'm saying, I mean, this could be.
Well, Mike, I have a question, and it
How
goes
I
back
Met
to
Your Mother.
alumni of the College of Columbia. Can I form a protest on the campus? Supposing it's alumnus. I'm going back on campus to gather up some students for a peaceful protest. Should I be arrested?
I mean, they're talking about firing them. They're talking about firing
He's
them.
talking about an alumnus coming
If
on.
you're told to leave and you don't leave, then you're trespassing.
Right.
I'm a part of but I can get on campus. What do you mean if I don't leave, I'm trespassing? That's my alma mater, right?
If you're told to leave, it doesn't matter if you went there or not.
It doesn't give you the right to just stay on the campus whenever you want in any part of campus for as long as you want, overnight, and taking over these buildings. You're not a student there. You think alumni can just walk up and down the halls of the dorm indiscriminately whenever they want?
Well, it's a peaceful protest, though.
You're still
don't I have the right to go on my campus?
And that goes to what Andre said. Maybe you think that that's a good thing for you to do, but you could still be in violation of laws and still be kicked out, arrested, right?
If you're told to leave. You can go on the campus.
See, that's the same thing they're
say,
doing with these students. They're telling them to stop. We're going to get to the point we're going to arrest you because you're on private property. Isn't that what you're saying?
If they're breaking the law, they can be arrested, yeah.
So they're breaking the law by protesting. Isn't that what they're saying?
Not by protesting, no.
But what is they breaking the law on then?
by not leaving when they tell them to leave.
Yeah, by being places they're not supposed to be. They're taking over a building that's not theirs.
Yeah.
Like you walking into some business and saying, I'm not going to leave because it's a protest, but you don't have a right to be there indefinitely.
Oh, looks like we're connection, but so I agree with Andre. I hope they're having a good time. I hope they're safe. I hope it doesn't end like a Kent State situation.
Oh, no, no,
Right,
no,
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 that'd be
no, no,
disastrous.
no,
Yeah.
don't even say that. That's, but what I'm
Mhm.
saying, the only reason I bring it up is that, students should know the history of protests and
Sure.
what students kind
Yeah.
of gave up for their right now to kind of, hang out in Hamilton Hall. Or
Well, let's
But
before we
historically, when you stop and you look at the protest, historically, someone was always arrested,
yeah.
right?
I didn't
sure, sure.
Because they
It's
were
part.
told
I didn't quite get
to
that. The audio
do
is very choppy right
You
something.
said historically in protests, someone's
I'm
always.
saying,
now. Oh, it does happen. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, and we know that that's potentially a part of it. I mean, Dr. King was arrested. His mugshot's on the internet. We know that that happens, and but I don't think people are unaware of that. But I know one of we read earlier, one of their demands was that there was amnesty for them that took part in it.
Right. Right.
Uh, Now, before we end off this conversation, I should mention, at least according to this article, the president of Colombia has said that they would not divest from finances in Israel, but instead offered to invest in health and education in Gaza and make Colombia's direct investment holdings more transparent. So
Right.
they have accomplished something, and there has been some kind of dialogue apparently. So I mean, maybe that's as much as they can expect.
All right. Well, speaking of as much as one can expect, we did want to briefly, before we signed off here, talk about the criminal contempt charge of today. Some people
I
saying,
was waiting for it.
for those watching the video, Andre is doing a little dance and smiling. Some people saying that we got as much as we can expect from that, which was a $9,000 fine. The
Hey,
law.
hey, 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 hey. Let us dream. Let us
Well, let me
dream
finish.
of
Let me
the
finish.
day.
The law only allowed for $1,000 fine per instance of contempt. There were 9 of them, so a $9,000 fine. I did read the judge's decision, however, and the judge said, listen, basically, the judge would want to fine Trump more for contempt, but was constrained by the law and said, since he has so much money that $9,000 probably isn't going to deter that kind of behavior again, he will look to exercise the other option, which is jail time. I believe 30 days is the max for that. But he's basically saying if you are in contempt again, we know these fines aren't doing anything, so we're going to the jail sentence.
Judge Merchan, please look, the man has already faced a judgment of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
These $1,000 penalties do nothing. Jail cell, baby. Let's go. Let's go.
Now,
I think it's only a matter of time before he offends again, and so then
right.
we're going to be testing whether the judge is.
So here's the thing. Part of the decision is he has to take those offending posts down from his Truth Social account. I think he has until Friday to do it. Will he do it? Will he not do it? If he doesn't, will that be the criminal contempt that puts him in jail? That's possible, right? The other thing is, for those keeping score at home, we can now, because he was convicted beyond a reasonable doubt per the judge, we can now refer to him as a convicted criminal.
I think we've probably considered him that the whole time.
Oh, there's a difference between what you consider and what actually
Right,
happened,
right,
right? This actually has happened, and that is a serious thing.
right.
I did, before we went live here, I showed you, Jay, a study found that 55% of voters nationwide believe that he has committed some crimes. That's a big number.
It is, and
But
it's a
again,
number
maybe
for
we
him
want it
be
to be higher, but you're still talking about a majority of the country now believing he's a criminal.
right, and it's a huge number in general, but it's also even bigger when you think about he's the front runner for a major party for the presidency of the United States, and he's a former president as well. Like it's ridiculous. It's really insane.
Hey, by the way, before you sign off, have you guys talked about Kristi Noem yet and why she will never become
No,
president?
we haven't talked about the dog stuff. It's yeah.
Yes. By the way,
My question, Andre, does this
Kristi
help her
Noem
or
is
hurt
one of
her?
the worst human beings ever.
Does this help her or
Nobody.
hurt her chances of getting the VP nod?
Oh no, no,
Why?
no, no. They've the Trump people already said that they're all horrified too.
Oh,
That
okay.
like no human being like is for the killing of 14-month-old puppies except
Well,
Kristi Noem. She has not realized that like this is not a thing that America goes with. Right now, there's bipartisan support to just like expel her from the country. Like
Wow.
what? I must have missed that.
Oh yeah, she came out with a book.
she's coming out with a book. She shot a 14-month-old puppy for it. She said that was untrainable with a shotgun.
And
Oh,
because it was a
then
poor hunter.
No, she said it was untrainable.
yeah.
She
No,
tried
no,
to
the other
train it
part was
with
untrainable and had worthless skills as a hunter.
correct. She said
Oh,
she
I
hated
did hear
the dog,
that. Yes.
and then she
Oh
didn't
my
have enough.
God.
She didn't have enough. She had not satiated her bloodlust, and then she killed the family goat
Oh,
as
She killed a
well,
goat. Yeah.
but couldn't get it done with the last shell, so had to
Had
reload.
to do it again. And then admitted that the children came home and asked where was the dog.
oh,
It basically happened right when the children were arriving.
Yep, sick human being.
Jesus Christ. I did see something about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
He was
did
on the
too.
short list
Yeah,
for VP.
wow.
Modern day Republican Party, ladies and gentlemen.
Crazy.
It's insane. That's crazy. You know it's crazy if they got bipartisan support on it. So, well, I think he's gonna offend again. It's a matter of time. He doesn't know how to stop.
No,
Um, and so what's gonna happen is we're gonna see whether the judge is really gonna stick to their guns
Oh,
and give him that jail time. Because I mean, even this has probably been, several offenses deep already. Like,
All right. Also, worth mentioning, not the first time he's been held in contempt of court. First time was in 2022 in response.
right,
oh,
right.
So that should tell you something, right? I mean, why would anyone support someone who has contempt for the judicial process?
Right. Well, and I mean, he has contempt for the Constitution too.
Yes.
So I mean, and he's all but said it. So
he's a con man that has contempt for the country.
yeah,
Always.
absolutely. It doesn't apply to him as far as he's concerned.
Right. And
Like
that's not
he's
hyperbole. He's literally going to the Supreme Court to try to get them to say that.
yeah, right. And I saw a meme the other day that says that that kind of put it in perspective, saying that just keep in mind that Trump is not on trial saying that he didn't commit a crime. His defense is saying that he's allowed to commit crimes.
That's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
As long as he's doing it as the president.
right. So, I mean, this is
Oh,
a
but
guy
this
that
was prior, though, right? Don't forget, this one was prior to his first election.
oh.
I mean, they
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
tell
no,
him
100%.
they had to tell him you're not allowed to tamper with witnesses. Like, I mean, if you have to tell him that, this guy is a problem.
Well, no, to be fair, it's not that they have to tell him that. It's that they have to tell him that on the record so that when he
Right.
breaks, you know what I mean? And so
Like,
it's insane. Look, we've been talking about it for a very long time now how crazy all of this is, and it just keeps getting crazier. And I think that it hasn't peaked yet. And I think that we have quite a troubling November and general election season to look forward to. I
Yeah.
think that we are not done. I think that we are just, we're going to have conversations later on, probably on this podcast, even about, the new lows that the modern day GOP fully embraced within this Trump fever.
absolutely.
The new lows that they will sink to.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, with that said, I think it's time to wrap up. We like to give our guests the last word. We call it the bottom line. So, Andre, what is the bottom line?
The bottom line is that Kristi Noem is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that, except
And
for
by the
maybe.
way, you know what I mean? I really hope that a lot of those protesters, they write some protest songs because, we haven't had good protest songs in a while. It would be nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
here's the
true.
thought, by the way, that I had, not to step on your bottom line, but to piggyback off that point in a way, you know, the whole chant about Genocide Joe or whatever coming from some of these folks, if he's Genocide Joe, what is Trump? I mean, if you're ready to use the word genocide for Joe, where do you go from there? Because Trump is like 100 times worse in that regard, right?
I mean, if you're trying to do alliteration, a terrorist is the closest that you're gonna get, because
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right, well, scary times. What can we say?
Yeah.
Jay, where can people find us?
They can find us on the internet everywhere. YouTube at Nuance Show, where you can get all the replays, as well as wherever podcasts are. Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, all that.
That sounds good. Thank you to everyone for checking us out. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Sheba. Thank you, Jay. As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time. Take care, y'all.